We were originally scheduled for Monday earlier this week.
Yes,
Glad we were able to get it today, but you were pulled away to an end of life ceremony.
yes,
Is that correct?
yes.
Walk me through that.
Uh,
Something something I kind of personally believe is that like as a society, I think especially in Western culture specifically, we lack rites of passage. Whether it's
mm,
boy becoming a man, man becoming a father, whatever that may be, becoming a husband, but then also returning to the earth from which we came. I feel like just as a society, we lack some of those rites and rituals that at one point guided our societies. So
yes.
I'd love to hear about this end of life ceremony you performed.
Well, you have multiple parts to typical end of life process, and that's when I arrive. We do a lot of talking. We help people understand what's going to happen, what happens, from their ancestors' perspective. Where are they now? How are things now? Um, at which point, many times we have rituals that would involve the preparing of the body, the the presentation of the body, that those who need that physical connection and that physical release can do that. um, and then, most often than not, what I try to do as a shaman is that we move the procession away from the grief, the struggle, to the celebration of what's happening, of what's occurring, and those would involve dances and music and obviously feasting and just enjoying life, and then sharing the tales of the individual's accomplishments and their journey in life and what they brought to us, what we can take away from their journey. All of those things kind of move into a day, multiple day process, depending on how many people are in attendance. In this one I did, there was about 300 in attendance. And
Wow.
so the retailing of stories and the regaling of the events that all of these folks would have taken away from interacting with this person. That's really what we covered for a day and a half, really, and feasting and dancing, and it was a wonderful time. I hope that uh, the ancestor would have been proud. Most importantly, I hope that people who were in attendance took away this idea that as the ancestor left the physical realm, they imparted upon us these great lessons and these great memories at which we can now hitch our future growth to, and hopefully really grow. So it's a very involved process, and each one's unique, right? You get individuals who may not have been as as socially interactive, if you will, and so it's a little bit more private. In this case, this individual was very public person. They
Yeah,
were very
300 people.
yeah,
That's a good amount of people at a
yeah.
funeral.
So
Jeez.
so uh yeah, so those things. And then in this case, they chose for the cremation, obviously. um and that was handled by the public health officials. So yeah, so it was 3 days of interest for me. Certainly learning about this individual. I didn't know them personally, so but wonderful, wonderful
Yeah.
man. He will have a great legacy.
Now, Mark, is it legal to perform a Viking funeral?
It is not.
It
Not
is
in the
not.
United States. No.
Ah, gosh, dang it! Even on your own private property.
Now, now let me caveat. Let me caveat. Yes, yes, not even on your own property. But
No, dang it!
let me caveat that by saying, depending on which funeral that you celebrate of the Scandinavian, because there were two, you know that. There
Mm,
was the ship-borne um, fire,
yep.
where you would be on
Archer
a
from the
ship,
shore. Yep.
right? Yep, and that was not as used as one might think.
Mm,
There was the onshore pyre, where you would have been on land and just
mm,
consumed in the fire.
mm,
But for the most part, what history tells us is that many, particularly lords and of higher statute, individuals of that era, were buried in ship graves. So
Interesting.
they were made. There would have been rocks formed like a ship, and the individual would have been buried in there on shore. So these would have been on land. So those are okay. But you start getting the fire thing, and people get a little
Sure.
nervous.
Sure. No, absolutely. So, Mark, you are an Ulf Hefnar.
I
Did I
am
say that correctly? Okay.
you pretty close. Yes, pretty close.
Hey, I'll take it. It took us a couple of minutes when we spoke last time to get the
Yeah.
pronunciation. What that means is that you are a Celtic or a Norse Celtic shaman, correct?
Well, the Ulf Hefnar is just, it means, Old Norse translation says wolf pelt.
Okay.
So I am bound to a spiritual animal of a wolf, and I can assume some of their skills and abilities in conflict if I had to.
And what would those skills of the wolf be, as opposed to something like the berserker that is of the bear?
Correct. Good, good. And that is exactly right. And what it gives us is the keen eyesight. It gives us smells in conflict. Only during the trance we can be, and then in much the same way as our brothers the berserkers, we would not be hurt by iron or fire during a trance. So we could um, combat other living beings without fear of being damaged by metal, iron. So, but the
And
wolf pelt was a little different in that, because wolves are so cunning and they're so smart,
mm,
whereas bears rely more on brute force. The Ulfhafnars were more cunning and more intelligent, and so we interacted with the Landvetti as an example, and so that essentially we could ask the land itself, the very land, to combat our enemies in our stead, and so it gave the kings, in this case, we know from the historical record that King Harald used the Ulfhefnar and the Berserkers in unifying Norway. So, but that's what it is. And then
interesting.
when we weren't, obviously, and my part is I became what is known as a shaman because of that, because
Interesting.
that's
Now,
what
do
they said.
only the Ulf Hefnars of the wolf become shamans, or are there shamans that can come from the berserker line as well?
No, berserkers were more about conflict. They're more about combat.
Okay.
They were more
Interesting.
warriors, whereas the Ulfhefnars had the shamanistic, and there were people who were part of a clan per se, who were not either of those other things, but still could be shaman.
Yeah. Now, so Mark, so I know you're currently in Alaska,
Yep.
correct?
Yes,
Did you grow up in Alaska?
I did not.
You did not. Where did you grow up?
I was actually born on the East Coast in Ohio. My father, being a land surveyor, we moved around quite a bit. I
Sure.
lived in New Jersey, Louisiana, uh, Arizona. I met my wife, so some might say that's where I really grew up, there in Washington.
Sure.
And then,
Yeah.
my wife and I moved here to Alaska, uh, 1994, I believe.
Okay. So it's been, I mean, what is that? Almost 30 years, 28
Yes,
years, good
yes.
amount of time. Okay. So, I mean, Mark, um, and are your parents direct lineage from Norway, Northern Europe? I'm just curious, like what kind of like bloodline connection you have
I,
back
uh,
there.
I am a third generation, born here
Okay.
in America. Uh,
Cool.
my great grandmother is born in Denmark. My
Okay.
other great grandmother is born in Lismore, Ireland, which is where the Celtic
Yeah.
part of the Norse comes from. Uh,
Yeah.
and then now that I have done some study and some learning, I have found that we have approximately, well, to date, about 20 generations in Denmark and about 18 generation in Southern Ireland.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, I'm when I do the blood tests or everything, I'm 70 odd percent Scottish.
Wonderful.
And have found that a lot of the same, I think, similarities as you and your family tree, that hey, like you go far enough back and there's definitely some Dane slash Viking influence in the bloodline for sure. So I mean, Mark, here's the question of the century for me.
Okay.
Okay. Ohio born and raised, New Jersey, Arizona, Washington. How the hell did you stumble across becoming a Norse shaman?
That's actually a very long, drawn out journey, and please
Sure.
understand that the journey that I took to get from that humble birth to becoming a shaman, much of it occurred where I wasn't watching. Okay, I wasn't
Sure.
paying attention. I was living life. I was trying to do this, that, or the other thing. So, um, excuse me. I would say the journey began in earnest when I had a near death experience where I overdosed on heroin, um, in
Mm,
Tucson, Arizona. I had returned home addicted to cocaine and heroin from the Marine Corps after I had served as a U.S. Marine. Came home 40 days later. After coming home, my father passed
mm,
onto the spiritual realm. I went on a year and a half ish self destruct mode, where I was trying to drink and shoot up to a point where I would join my ancestors. Didn't quite make it. But what happened is I overdosed on heroin alone. I was alone in a drain culvert in South Tucson, Arizona. And of all the people on the planet to find me, a member of the Hells Angels Motorcycle Club discovered me. I had hung around with them um, quite frequently there in Arizona. He found me in this drain culvert. He scooped me up and took me back to his mobile home, where he locked me in a bedroom and broke me of the roughly about 5 year heroin habit, and gave me $300 cash, a pickup truck, and told to leave the state and not come back, because he
mm.
knew the influences would drag me back into the realm that I had just left from. Um, but it was during this breaking where he locked me in a room, and I was being released from the grasp of heroin, that I really came to recognize many, many, many things. Um, a lot of things became more concrete. Um, I mean, I had known about metaphysical existences since a very young child. My mother practiced it when I was a young child. So I knew a lot of these things, and a lot of these things were tugging at my heart and tugging at my mind. but I had just never given them credence. And it wasn't until we had to battle the demons there of heroin, where a lot of these thoughts then became, oh, okay, I need to start thinking about this and in this way. That led me to, as I mentioned, leaving Arizona, traveling up the or west coast. My brother was stationed at the time in Oak Harbor with the Navy, and so I joined him and my mother there in Washington. Started picking up a little job here and there. Wound up meeting my lovely bride in a bar in Mount Vernon, Washington. 6 weeks later, we married, and uh, I've been clean since I broke the habit there in coming to Washington. Her and I went on to build a life, and she is a very devout Christian, very strong, independent, fiercely independent woman. I love her beyond words. But it was her aura who began to instruct me even further into my spiritual connections, understanding how she saw the world and understanding how her aura interacted with mine, and how all of those pieces fit together to make us so, because we were like oil and water. Okay. um, for a long time. But what I didn't understand, and this is what her aura taught me, is how life is like that. Okay, we kind of fit. I'm always reminded of the yin and the yang symbol, where you've got the two teardrops, if you will, kind of wrapping around each other and fitting perfectly. And it was this concept that really began to take hold. Um, Long story short, at which point my mother asked me to do some. It's called genealogy work. And so I said, okay, sure, I'll do this. And I began to investigate and to learn and to grow. And it was there, 2020. Uh, don't get me wrong, this happened long before then. But in 2020, I had a vision. And the vision came to me here in my backyard, where I met Odin face to face. And we have the scars to prove. But we did a blood bond, blood oath in our my backyard, and so I've been a sworn Ulf Hefnar. Uh, he informed me that this was a birthright, and that uh, many grandfathers ago, my great however many levels ago, was Ulf Hefnar, and so that I would be assuming then my birthright. And so that's kind of the long journey that's taken. I would say, if you count the metaphysical time, I mean, this has taken 50 years to understand. But again, it was this hindsight where I began to reflect back that I think I learned the most about how the journey put the pieces together to get me where I am today.
Yeah. So I guess the question that comes to mind, Mark, and just because I want to understand where you're coming from,
Please.
how how literal are Odin and Freya in your mind? It is Freya, the goddess, right?
Freya is a goddess. Um,
Is that the counterpart to Odin, though? Is that the female
she,
counterpart? Or
yes, yes, she
okay,
is the
okay, sorry,
veneer,
okay,
right? She is
okay.
veneer. He is Assyrian. Um, so, how literal are they? They are a word to describe a deity figure,
Mm,
like a Christian would call him God, or Yahweh, or
yep.
Allah, or Buddha, or whatever. Odin and the pantheon there in the Norse are words that were used by a society to describe what they knew. Um, and so, while I do call to Odin, I do call to Freya, I do call to these gods and goddesses. Um, because I believe that in the universe there's a balance, right? You have
Mhm.
the strength and the character of the masculine. This is Odin. You have the power and the knowledge and the nurturing of the feminine, which is Freya to me.
Mm.
So, but I believe that all deities are simply a mass, very large collection of spiritual energy within our universe.
And we just use these titles and names
Right.
as representations of that
Correct.
energy. Oh, I love that.
Correct. And we need labels, right? We need we need to say that thing or that
Sure.
person, because it's
Yeah,
just the
we
way
do.
our language is formed. So we need to address those things, and that's what we use terms like Zeus, Apollo, Ra, Osiris, Creator, God, Allah. All of these
Yeah.
words we are simply just applying to what we understand to be this all-encompassing power.
Yeah. Um, and I'm looking at your necklace there, Mark. Are those the two wolves of
Those
Odin?
are.
What
Yes,
what are their names again?
oh gosh, I couldn't,
I
to
know
be
it's on the
perfectly,
tip of my tongue.
yep,
I
I
can't
could,
remember.
I wanna say freaky, and it's been so long since I read those stories. Nope. I have to look
No,
it up,
you're
my
good.
friend.
I was just curious. No, I was totally curious. No, and I think that's very astute, right? Like, even so, like, personally for myself, like, I would consider myself rather agnostic. Like, I'm very, very, very uncertain as to the existence of any deity. I grew up extremely Christian,
Most
but
people have.
yeah. And as I entered adulthood and kind of started thinking for myself, it was like, is this something I really believe in? But even as I battle, um, as I kind of have that battle in my mind to try and determine, one, there's part of me that recognizes that it's probably an unknowable answer. And so I should stop freaking out about it. But also, two, it is really difficult to like deny that there is something behind the scenes,
Well, I think you
you know?
you and I think, my friend, you are in the same situation that many people find themselves in, and this is where within this word, and I'm going to use the big word called religion. Within
Yeah.
religion, there's actually two parts. Okay, there's the the theism. Do I believe in a God? How does that manifest in my life? And what spiritual influences do I have in my life? That's the theism side, um, which, the further back in time we can go back to indigenous practices and the indigenous understanding, theism can become much more clear. Okay, it's the other part of what we call religion today, which is where things kind of really um, create a lot of problems with people's beliefs. And this is the what I call the practice, right? So you have the theism and the practice; those two bundled together make a religion. And where I think most humans worldwide, so you're not alone, worldwide, where most humans struggle is where we get to the practice side of it. The theism side is not so much. It's the practice. And what the practice unfortunately does is, for those individuals who struggle with control, who don't like being manipulated, um, and who want to think for themselves, it's really contradictive to the practice, because the practice was originally implemented to control society. So I wanted to make sure that you behaved right. I could apply this guilt and the shame to you, to force you to behave a certain way. And then, so I would say, where most people struggle today is in modern day religion. Theism no longer plays the majority of the role.
Mm.
The practice is more the role. You should do, thou shalt. Those terms are more prevalent than, do you really know who and what you believe, you know, what rings true when we talk about living authentically. In my daily show, this past week, we've been talking about that. And we've been talking about the application of culture to our spiritual belief. And we've talked about living what I call congruently or authentically, where your heart says, man, I really feel that, I believe, right? And your brain says, you know, that really makes sense. It kind of puts together these pieces. And when those two things happen, you're living what's called congruently or authentically. And that's where I believe spirituality then begins to just spirituality, not religion, not theism, not practice, but this you start getting these influences from our spiritual surroundings, if you will. And I think that's where many people have are. As I meet with particularly the younger generations, they're really struggling with this idea of the practice. They don't have as much issue with theism because most people don't really have a foot in the pool of theism. They really, a lot of people go to church and all they understand is the practice side of it. They don't put any application to the theism side of it. And so that's where I think a lot of people struggle, because obviously, as we know, practice can't stand on its own 2 feet. It has to kind of adjoin to something. I have to go out and in a full moon, and I have to go out and I have to dance in my backyard. I have to. I don't have to because some shaman before me has told me this is what I got to do. I have to because I feel it. It right in my bones. It drives me to go run outside in the middle of the night and dance to a full moon. That's what I do. But that practice of doing that isn't driven by this extrinsic force, right? It's me. The spirits in me say, we really need to go outside and dance. And I say, yes, let's do it. I'm 56 years old and out of shape. Let's go dance. And that's what we do.
This inner kind of voice that you're talking about,
Mhm,
it's something that I personally I feel like probably specifically over maybe the last year,
mhm,
if that. Like it's a very recent thing. I'm actually in the last year has been really big for me. I think religiously as well. This last year has really been the first year I've been away from the predominant religion that I was raised with,
mhm,
which I would consider to be rather high demand. And kind of to your point, like was almost everything,
mhm.
right? If you weren't doing all of the practices exactly to a T, there were issues.
Right.
Um, and I think one of the things that I've really learned over the last year is that because of this upbringing, this religious upbringing, there are definitely voices within me that were suppressed, right?
Mhm,
And I think especially over the last couple months to a year, I'm learning to listen to that voice within me that's like actually kind of to your point. I think you like I have a hard time explaining it, but something about it feels ancient. Something about it like does feel like it's like in my bones, like in my very being.
right.
And I'm trying to give that voice more I'm trying to give it more room to speak. I'm
Mhm,
trying to listen to it more,
right.
and I'm trying to act according to it more. And I'm sure for everyone, like the voice manifests itself differently.
Correct.
I'm probably not of the wolf. I'm probably of the berserker to a certain degree, because when I listen to the voice, it tells me to do hard things that make me feel so fulfilled afterwards.
Right.
Um, It's late. I'm not going to get much sleep. I don't want to go to the gym in the morning. But then I feel that calling from within my soul to say, no, go do it.
Yeah.
Um, I like to take a lot of cold showers. Or I should say, I force myself to take cold showers. And on mornings where I really don't want to do it, I can feel that voice coming up again to say, no, like brave the cold,
Right.
So it's this, so definitely more berserker than wolf, I think.
Well, I mean,
Because
you have plenty there. I mean, just because
sure,
you're not bear or wolf doesn't count you out
sure,
by no means.
yeah,
But you're exactly right, and we have to always remember that in our daily life, and this, by the way, hopefully you'll be willing to pick up the book, which my book is coming out. It'll be
yes.
out
What's it
this
called?
the turn to final,
Okay, that's right.
and the
We're gonna
turn
link
to
it below.
the turn to final is coming out. It'll be produced by Blue Fortune Enterprises, and they are a wonderful book company. But in the book, it talks about what many people don't think about is this idea that you have a spiritual self. You do. You're. It's the way every physical being is created around a spiritual center. Okay, it's just those are facts. And what we are here to do is to learn emotions, how to control emotions, but most importantly, how to be empathic towards others. How can we help our descendants? Right? Is when we go on to our spiritual existence and we leave behind this physical existence. How can we better help our descendants? And that's what we're here to learn. When we talk about the our lives, and I love your definition, by the way, we we live in a spiritual aura, and that aura is always around us. That aura is either clear because our mind is becoming more clear, because it's our aura is directly dependent upon our mental state. So if we're all in a hustle and everything's all scrambled, our aura becomes very cloudy, and and the frequency at which it is produced is really high. So it's very hard for others when our mind is scrambled. It's very hard for others to kind of click with us because our frequency and everything is so wound up. When we use exercises like mindful exercises or meditation is another great a way of clearing our mental state so that we can then have this clear aura, and the frequency at which the aura is produced around us becomes more joinable. It becomes more bondable to other entities. This is where you're going to hear those voices, my friend. This is where the spiritual ancestors, the spiritual entities around us, even our deities, begin to communicate. They're always communicating. We're just now able to understand what they're saying, because as like light, okay, in your bathroom, this is my greatest example. In your bathroom, you have those globes around the light bulb. Okay, and they protect it so that the kids don't spray water into the light bulb itself, but they're globes. And you have two types of globes. You have the clear globe, where that light is just really bright and it shines and all around. And then you have the frosty one, right, where it
Mhm.
diffuses the light. You get light, but it's not as much as, say, that globe was clear. This same application applies to our aura, except this time we're the light bulb. And we have all of these entities, all of this spiritual energy, which, by the way, we've, as as a race, we've discovered how to measure. So we have quantum energy that's coming in through this aura. And then if the aura is clear, that energy just comes right into the light bulb, right? And it just illuminates us, it educates us, it informs us, it grows us. But when our globe then, or our aura, is frosty because our mind is caught up in the hubbub of every day, and that aura gets frosty, yes, the energy is still coming in, the communication is still coming in, but it becomes really hard to understand. And this is where we get into, you know, when we clear that mind and we start hearing your voices, that influence is coming into us from our ancestors. This is spirituality. This is the textbook definition, or should be. I don't know that it is, but it should be the textbook definition of now being a spiritual being. Because this is what, if you think momentarily, put into your mind those peoples migrating out of Africa 200,000 years ago. Very simple. They more thought, their thinking process was more aligned with animals, so they acted more like animals do. So very instinct orientated, very uh, they weren't retrained unless the same event happened the same way multiple times. So, and it was then that they began this evolution, if you will, as they took on. And if you read the book, I'll explain the hormones that came into the body that began to explode the synapses in the brain and began to make all these connections in the brain. And we began to have more cognitive thought. Now, most scientists agree that anywhere from about 150,000 to 50,000 years ago, humans, the atomical modern human, obtained cognitive thought. So we could think bigger than what's for supper right now. We we began to have these bigger thoughts and these bigger. We had cause and effect. We had all these different thought processes for the first time in certainly human existence, but in existence we began to have these cognitive thoughts. As humans moved through that, they you have to remember that they are communicating directly, probably almost like you and I are talking right now, with their ancestors, and learning and teaching and growing. And that begat this whole evolution to where we are today. That, my friends, is spirituality. That relationship that those people had with their ancestors, with their deity, because they had a deity too. Um, you know, I tell a story in the book, and I'll give your listeners the insight here. But there's a story in the book where we talk about a family in a cave, and the young person watches the elder who has learned from his ancestors how to create fire. Right, so they're sitting down. They have the little pile of tinder and wood, and the ancestor or the elder takes the rock and he smacks the other rock against it. Smack, smack, smack. Now, what does two rocks smacking together in a cave sound like? It sounds like thunder. Okay, follow the thinking. So two rocks fly together. We see the spark leave one rock, shoot into the tinder, and start a fire. And all of a sudden, we're warm. We can cook our food. Life. We have light. You know, all of these really cool things. Now, that same person leaves the cave. They're migrating further west, or in their case, further east. um, and they're out in the open plains, and it starts to rain a little, and a streak of lightning comes down from the sky, and it hits a tree, followed by what? Thunder. What think very simplistically, would you not think that what you just saw is a larger scale version of what your elder did in the cave?
Absolutely.
It's the same event. So remember, we're just getting cognitive thought at this time in human history. So all of a sudden, we find a person or thing, we're not sure which yet, bigger than we can see, doing the same thing the elder did in the cave. And there begat theism, because you could now say, oh, not only did they strike two rocks together and get the lightning that came down and started the fire over there, but they're always blowing this wind in my face or at my back, whichever I happen to be traveling upon. And and then I'm walking along and the ground shakes. Well, that's not something an elder can do. So it has to be a bigger elder. And so begat this idea of a theism. And that idea then you will see through almost every indigenous practice in the world. You will see where we have a creator who does wondrous things. He takes care of his peoples, and he's in union with Mother Earth, right? The feminine, the sacred feminine who can give life. And so those two kind of forces help the humans grow, learn, love, and evolve to what you are today, or what I am today, what we are as a race. That's where, but that's really in the book I talk about the birth of theology and how that came to be. And so from a humanistic perspective, and in the book also talks about the science of how deities came to be. And this information was given to me by spiritual entities. But the idea that from a human perspective, we needed a label to put on something. That's really where the whole idea of the God came from.
Yeah. And then I mean, and then from there it's an avalanche, it's a chain reaction
Right.
because the Dunbar number, that we, prehistory, humans could really only manage around 150 like social interactions at any given time, right? So tribe sizes were limited, but then when you have something, when multiple tribes come together and say, "Oh, we also praise the thunder, the god of
Right.
thunder,
Right.
Thor," like, hey, maybe we can actually all get together.
Right.
So those four tribes come together, 600. So it's like from there, it's just such a chain reaction. And I think to your point, after, possibly 150,000 years, some part of us, I firmly believe, has evolved to kind of, I think some people will mockingly call it the God gene or the God part of your brain, but
Right.
there is definitely something that calls to us from a genetic level to believe in something exterior because it aids in social utility, right? It
Right.
allows us to communicate and work together with more people. So I think that's um, it's fun to go back and think like, hey, where did all this come from? And I think to your point, like, yeah, thunder,
Yep.
spark in a cave, and then all
Yeah.
of a sudden, yeah, that connection's made. And
Yeah. And you will see that thought process. If you go back and you study it, you can watch the thought process grow to a place where about 3,500 pre geological epoch of modern day, we're going to find where somebody whom I have no idea figured out that most people are afraid of what they don't know. And this we call the mystical powers, or the mysterious powers. And this is really where you see the rise of the shaman or the medicine man in much more Eastern or Western thinking. You see kind of a sign that role to a singular individual within the tribe, or a very limited selection, because they were unafraid. They maintained their connection to the spiritual realm. And so someone figured out at about 3500 BC that, oh, you know, we can use people's ignorance, in a good word, to then control them. And so, hence the birth of what we know today to be Judaism, which then begat Christianity, begat the Muslim nation of Islam. Kind of all came there, all about the same uh, era and time. And they said, oh, not only are we going to tell you what your deity is, and how they function, but we're also going to tell you how to show people that you believe in this deity, not that deity. Um, what we find is, if you look through the history books, the alteration of Christianity, and Christianity is, I spent a decade and a half as a chaplain with the Christian church, so I understand, their thinking. And what we find is, with Christianity, it morphed just it any way it could to fit into a society. And we see it very strongly in the Scandinavian and in the Celtic area, as the spiritual. And this, again, the religion they were preaching wasn't really spiritual or the theism, it was the practice. And that's what these monotheistic mainstream religions that you have today, that's what they brought, is they brought this practice to the to spirituality, and locked in your behavior, locked in your expectations. And so today, I would say you're influenced 60% by those written rules that you read in the book, or you see a bumper sticker or something. 60% of your belief and your actions as a person are guided by those principles. 40%, which is a big number, 40% of your behavior is inadvertent application of these rules. In other words, I call it the grandma theory. And the grandma theory, it says, oh, you shouldn't do that. You should do it this way. You should do it this way. Why, grandma? Because that's the way it should be done. So the grandma theory says that I'm applying a correction to your behavior based on what I think I've interpreted from these practices in the past. And so 40% of your daily living is based on those types of applications. And I say grandma, but we know that friends, and they're doing it inadvertently. They don't realize they're doing it,
Yeah.
but they've grown up this way. And so they say, oh, thou shalt not lie. Thou shalt not do steal. Thou shalt not do this and that and the other thing. And you should always dress up and go to church on Sunday. Why? Because we need to fill the coffers of the church. Well, they may not say that, but that's why you're going. My point is that most of most people, when you stop and think about it and you say, why am I teaching that to someone else? You can't put your finger on why you're doing it. You kind of go, well, I don't know. It's just always been that way. Grandma, great grandma, mom, just someone in my ancestry has told me this is the way things are done. So I'm going to do it this way. And so, um, but a lot of what we are today is based on that application of a practice, not theism. Very rarely are modern people in modern religions, very rarely are they taught uh, the theism side. right? Um, I mean, it wasn't. I uh, I got involved in the church after meeting my wife because, of course, my wife is, as I mentioned, a very devout Christian, and we've had all kinds of conversations about this. And she is of the mind, which I find that many people subscribe to, is that she would rather be safe than sorry, is her thinking.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I'm like, what a horrible way to live a life. But if that's what she chooses, and and that gives her content, that gives her happiness, that gives her that inner center, have fun with that.
Yeah, what is it's the oh my gosh, I'm blanking on the name. Oh, it's the something proposition, I think. Oh gosh. It's kind of this idea. It's like I'd rather believe in God and be wrong and like follow all the rites
Right.
and practices of this religion in case it's right,
Just in case, hedging
just in case.
bets. Hedging
Hedging
bets.
bets.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Um how would you distinguish, Mark, because we talked about this a little bit at the beginning, how would you distinguish the practices of certain religions as opposed to like coming of age rites and ceremonies? Kind of, how would you distinguish those two? And this is something I think a lot about. As I have young sons, I have a 2.5 year old, and then my wife is pregnant with our second son. Um,
Congratulations.
Thank you. It is something I think about, um, because I, in my religious upbringing, did have certain rites and passages. I would have wanted them to be different, I think, but they were still, kind of clear delineations of like, hey, you're now past this age. You're a man now, kind of, so to speak. That's not the terminology used, but that's
Yes.
the essence, right? So how would you distinguish like rites of passage versus religious practice?
Well, I think, honestly, I guess it's the direction of the application. And when we talk about rites of passage, we're talking about intrinsic to extrinsic. When we're talking about religious practice, we're talking about extrinsic to hopefully intrinsic, which sometimes it makes the journey, sometimes it doesn't. But I think with rites of passage, I think, those moments, those events we celebrate as parents, as friends, as ancestors, we celebrate the arrival of a quote unquote mythical place. And I say that in that, we say, oh, you're 12 in the Judaism practice that, bar mitzvah, you're a man. Yay. At 12? I don't think so. But for them, that's the time. And so I think, the when we talk about rites of passage, particularly, those are followed. If we go back to the Norse Scandinavian type of thinking with that, there's usually accompanied by some event, right? So um, when we reach, you know, whatever mythical day in our lives, we see in the indigenous practice, you're sent off to a mountaintop that you've got to climb, and hopefully you'll receive a vision. Um, and it works. Okay, so I'm healthy enough to where I could fight off wolves if I was addressed, or I could, get my way healthily to the top of the mountain where I could receive this vision. So, from a practical standpoint, the elder looks at the child and says, "Yes, you're old enough. No, you're not old enough yet." And then what many cultures did is we found approximate dates. Is we say, "Oh, he's this age, and so as a that age, he should be able to do this." It's up to the father then to say, "Oh, I've got to teach you all the skills necessary to get to the top of the mountain. When you're 12, you're going to do that." I'm reminded I started and I just started. I literally saw the first like 20 minutes of the television show Vikings. I don't know if
Mhm.
you've watched that, but I
I have.
watched I watched the first like 20 minutes of the series, and that's all I've had time to do right now. But in the show, the father speaks to his son, and he says, "Yeah, you're getting to the age where you can come with me, and you can go on this adventure, and we're going to go raid and do whatever." And I'm saying, okay, how did he judge that? How did he say that? How did what frame of mind was a father that he could say, okay, hey, you've reached the age now where you can go and do this. And so I did a little reading because that's the way I am. I get some fact in my head and I've got to read everything I can about it. And in many cases, from a societal perspective, we said all children who reach the age of 12 are now ready for this, are ready for this rite of passage, right? This event that we're going to create. But we found, and as well today, some people reach the maturity necessary for that event at different ages, right?
Yeah.
So I could get my maturity at the end of the year, but yet I'm forced through this event in the beginning of the year because it's my 12th summer and yay, I haven't been eaten or killed yet. So I'm going to try this event. Um, Whether I was mature, technically mature or not, that jury is still out, really. But
Yeah.
because we had, as a society, said, well, all 12-year-olds are this, that, or this other thing. But I think realistically, from a ritualistic perspective, when we talk about rites of passage, we obviously have body maturity and events that happen in our lives that mom and dad want to celebrate and say, look at you've grown, you've done this, you've done that. And that's where these rites of passage, but I think it's an intrinsic thing that then mom and dad recognize in the child and celebrate.
Mm. I love that. So it's really, it's not based on time. It's just based on, I guess, readiness for the challenge, the right, the passage, whatever it may
Right.
be. Right. And so I grew up in the Mormon faith,
Mhm.
the Latter Day Church of Jesus Christ of Latter Day Saints, and you get the priesthood at age
Mhm.
12,
Right.
and then you get kind of an increase at 14, then 16,
Right.
then a big one at 18, right? So it's
Right.
very, very,
Right.
hey, all you have to do is just time.
Right.
That's it. But what you're suggesting is like, hey, it's probably better that we just like, you know, kind of to your point, hey, rite of passage is to climb this mountain.
Right.
Uh no, that should be based off preparedness,
Right.
maturity, intelligence, patience,
Right. You can't expect,
self-restraint. Yeah.
yeah, you can't expect someone to complete a task if you haven't given them the tools to do that. You're
Yeah.
setting them up for failure. And I
Yeah.
think that's part of where the religious practices. I think that's part of where it failed, is that it set people up for failure by
Yeah.
not evaluating them individually.
Yeah. So, Mark, your message from what I'm gathering is, you're wanting to apply ancient wisdom to modern day,
R-
correct?
Taking away the complexity. That's right.
Okay, I love that. What in your experience with the people you've talked with, the conversations you've had, the experience you've had, what are some of the kind of ancient ways? What's some of the ancient wisdom that you see time and time again kind of just pop up all the time in terms of what we're missing as modern people? Because we're hurting.
I
Like
agree.
we are hurting as a human species. Like, I think especially in like it's so weird, but like especially in like first world
Right.
modern countries in the West and in Europe, like depression is at an all-time high,
Mhm.
suicide, anxiety, like
Yep.
we we should be the happiest, healthiest people that have ever existed, but we're not.
Right.
So I'm curious if you have any common themes um, pop up as you're, in your journeys, travels, and honestly in your wisdom.
Well, thank you, and that I actually have wisdom. I think it's dumb luck sometimes, but
You have white hair. You of course you're
that
wise.
does
Come
not
on.
mean a thing. It means I've just lived long enough. But what I find most often in modern humans, more so, and particularly more so in first world countries, is this idea of of we're trying to be something we're not. We are always, and the masses, and this is certainly stereotypical, but many times we're trying to live up to something that is not authentic to us. We're
Mm,
trying to be something we're not, and regardless, and we always do it. We do it at work. When we go and we have a relationship with colleagues at work, we're 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 putting on this mask for our colleagues at work. We're putting on our masks for our friends at the softball game, or whatever. And and the way I know this, and you'll be able to tell it right away, is that someone will say to you, I didn't know. I didn't know this about you. That means that should be a red flag in our mind that says, you know what? I'm not living authentically. I'm not living who I am. I'm not living me. I'm living to meet societal expectations of me. And whatever that means, right? I come, I own a home here in Anchorage, and so I'm here in South Central Alaska, and everyone says to me, "Oh, well, you should be this or you should be that." No, no, my friends, I'm me. I just happen to be here, okay? But I'm still me. I live authentically to who I am, what I believe, who I, uh, 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 represent. Really, I mean, if I don't live authentically, my actions then are not dictated by any rule set, right? So I say, "Oh, I'm I'm of Scandinavian descent with a very large streak of 38% Irish." Okay, so very Celtic in origin. And I say, I look at the nine noble virtues of the Norse, who would later go on to become the Vikings. And I say, you know what? Of those nine noble virtues, I believe I successfully live by all nine. Those are kind of my cornerstones to who I am. And if anyone meets me and they say, "Oh, yeah, he is on those nine. Those nine represent who he is and how he interacts with us." I know I'm living congruently. I'm living authentically. I think all too often we get caught up in this modern day world where our brains are just 90 miles an hour, um, trying to reconcile how we feel against how we should act. And that's where, I find a lot of my work, as I mentioned before the show, a lot of my work, I work with veterans returning from combat assignments, and some of the things we talk about is, why do you believe this? You know, oh, I believe, because I had to kill this individual. Um, that's kind of certainly against societal rules. Well, wait a minute, hold on. Why? Why do you think that? Well, I think that way because society says that thou shalt not kill. But what does society say about you being in a combat zone against someone who is going to not only kill you but kill all your friends too? Well, it doesn't really reference that. There you go. See, you're trying to you're applying the wrong piece of society to this, you know. And so we have to work through that, and we have to talk about why, and I think, when we talk about modern day people, is we have a tendency, God's love us, that we try to make everything complex. Everything has to be complex. Where what I say is, in antiquity, and then people turn around and ask me in the same breath, why are people in the past so much happier or more content? Well, because they weren't complicated. They went to bed, they woke up, they survived another day, and they went to bed. Um, it was simple. They didn't try to uh, you know, overthink things. They didn't try to make things so darn complex. They knew what they wanted, how to get there, and they knew how to get help when they needed it. And those were the things that I think separate modern humans from past humans. So some of my advice to most people is, stop overthinking everything. Get back to what you know. Get back to who you are. The first step, I think, in getting to a place where you're content, happy, uh, you're easier, happier, is to know thyself. And I know that's on so many posters and bumper stickers. I could make a man if I just coined that phrase. But you have to know where you are to be able to adjust you, or adjust society to meet those criteria. You have to know who you are. And so I talk a lot about meditating and figuring out, getting some mindful exercises to understand why you think the way you do. And then once you can get there, then you can start going, you know what? That's a behavior, that's a belief I don't need.
Yeah.
Let's just dump that one and move to this other thing, and a more simplistic form of that. Take fear as an example. Why are we afraid? Well, we're afraid because of this or that, or we've seen some experience, or we've seen a movie. Um, all of those things. So those are all
Yeah.
ways that we can begin to find contentment, because once you get congruent, my friend, life is so much more simplistic, and it's so much more relieved of all the stresses that we pick up in modern society.
Yeah, I mean, I what comes to mind when I hear that, like, it's hard to know thyself though, because I think in order to see yourself for who you are, it means you see all the things that are potentially kind of nasty.
Yes.
To see the parts of you that could potentially be evil, to see your
Now,
faults
that
and
one I'll disagree with you on, my friend.
okay,
That one I will disagree. There is no
fair
evil.
enough.
That I hear it all the time, and people say, "Oh, that's evil." No, it's not evil. It's just energy. It is your mind that sets the polarity. Okay, so you're the one saying, "Oh, that's evil. That's dark. That's bad." No, it may not be. Because think about it. Take a belief that you have, any belief, pick one, and take it to another culture. Just think about it. Just say, okay, so today I'm going to be Buddhist. How do the Buddhists think about this? Eating a hamburger, prime example. To me, a hamburger,
Right.
oh, a big one. Yeah, right?
Sure. Yeah.
Take that to a Buddhist. They are incensed. Why? Because for them, the cow is very holy,
Yep.
right? Um, so a lot of these, when you think about your beliefs and what you think you know, is so, yes, step to another culture and say,
Sure.
what do they think about that? And then chances are you're going to go, huh, who knew? Maybe this isn't as bad or as evil as I thought. Again, it all comes down to perspective, and that's really where I think modern people wrapped around
Sure.
these label axles, and they just
Yeah.
can't get themselves out of it.
Yeah. No, I mean, I can definitely see where you're coming from on that. Personally, like, I still think there are, like, I totally get what you're saying, but I definitely think, like, to hurt, to rape, to kill out of mere pleasure of those things. Yeah, there are things like that where I think all of us have some innate, like, there is some part of us that could perform those atrocities to a degree. So,
Yeah,
and I would
but
and I would delineate between wrong and evil. Because, like, eating the hamburger as a Buddhist would be wrong, but then I feel like there are definitely still things that are universally evil and looked down upon
but
across almost all peoples.
but we say, rape, kill, murder, those things. But if you were in defense of your family's life, your very existence, do the rules change?
Yes, 100% they do.
Yes, exactly. So now,
Yeah.
again, putting it in perspective, is this, again, taking away this whole concept of evil? I that it is one pet peeve, and I apologize. I don't mean to
No,
get
that's
on the
okay.
soapbox.
Have your pet peeve. I love it.
um, but there really is no evil. It is the intention, the heart of man, that decides the polarity of the energy at which it receives. Because if I'm a serial killer, and I'm not, by the way, just FYI, put that out there up front. But if I was,
Sure.
and I received this energy, and the energy said, "Save this person," or I that's how I interpret it. Okay, I received this energy, and I said, "Save this person from falling off a cliff." Okay, but I'm a serial killer. I have two options. I can choose to save that person, or I cannot. Right? If I don't, I have assigned the polarity. Right? I have said, "Oh, just another life in my long list of serial kills." Right? But if I save them, I save them. Again, energy comes in. It is our intention, our heart, that decides where the polarity lies, where we're going to apply that energy to what society considers, you know, evil or dark, or whether it's good and light. So, but again, that comes from our heart, not from the energy itself. So there is no evil in the world. It is only the intention of man that makes things evil.
Would you would you say that applies to the other side as well then? Like, if there is no pure evil, is there any pure good?
No, energy is neutral.
Interesting.
Energy is neutral. It's how we decide to use that energy is what
And interpret it.
decides. Right.
Sure.
So energy, I mean, if you break it all the way down, go all the way down to the quantum
Sure.
level, and you say you take a molecule of energy and you say there's three parts, right? There's the neuron, there's the proton, and there's the electron. And that's what makes up everything.
Yeah.
Everything is based on those three things. You have positive polarity, you have negative polarity, and you have a neutrality. What's most popular? What's the most abundant? The neutrality. Protons spin around the neutron, electrons spin around the neutron's in the center. The neutron is always the central being. So it's all the energy that we receive from wherever, all that energy, it comes in, it's a neutral state. And it's up to us to then apply it for the good or apply it for the not so good. So it's on us.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I love that. No, I mean, I like the perspective for sure. Well, Mark, we're bumping up on time.
Yep.
Turn to Final is your book. Where else can people find everything they want about you?
Well, the website is our central location, and that's https://ak ulfhefnar.com. And let me spell that, because a lot of people get the
Please.
hef in there, and they get kind of wrapped around that axle. So it's AK for Alaska. Ulf is ULF. Hef is HED. which really
D
throws
is in
everyone.
dog. Correct.
D is in dog,
Okay.
NAR.com. And that's
Okay.
really the central location for all of our podcasts, all of our daily show. Everything is there. They can find out more about us and me, particularly. Um, and then we're working on our Patreon site. Our Patreon site is more of a pay site, but it will have more teachings that kind of lead up to the book. The book is due out this holiday season, from what I understand. Um, and the book is really, I call it my triad. And it's all received through channeling and trance work. And what the book is a triad between spirituality, is up in the top corner, to psychology, how we think, which is maybe different, and then the science to explain it. So you're going to get an understanding at a quantum level how spiritual energy addresses the psychology of modern humans. You know, how do we think, and what makes us think the way we think? So talks a lot about those, and then gives some exercises at the end of the book. I've included several exercises to help people begin to clear the memories and the emotional charges in their mind and begin to live authentically. And that's becomes really critical to helping people become content and happy with their lives, and passing that on. Because when we're content and happy, we can then communicate with others in a content and happy way, thereby helping them to become content and happy. And we continue that cycle. So that's the idea that the first book is. The second book is already in the writing. The second book will be more about how all of this, the first book, came to be. So it's more of a historical perspective, and so it talks about some stories that I've been given by my ancestors as to how they got me. I mean, where I came from and how these beliefs manifested. So those are due out. Second book due out in, I want to say, June of next year, but Turn to Final is definitely on its way to market. So they can reserve a copy of the book by going to that website that I give you. On there, there's a list where we're getting people who are interested in getting the book, and so those will be there that they can sign up. And they can also sign up
Mark.
for our monthly teachings, which comes out in a newsletter, emailed out. And all it is a recap of the previous month. Kind of puts all the stories in, or all the podcasts in order, and the daily shows that we do. Puts all those in order for you, so you can kind of look through and see if anything applies to what you're wanting to learn. Plus, an additional teaching from our Patreon site. So all of those are available on our website.
Well, Mark, I appreciate your time. Ulf Hefnar, I appreciate your wisdom. It's been a pleasure.